This is I Choose Life, news and views sponsored by Indiana Right to Life and Right to Life of Northeast Indiana, committed to defending innocent human life for all people of all ages. I Choose Life News and Views is produced by Bot Radio Network in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Welcome to I Choose Life News and Views. This is Abigail Lorenzen. Thanks so much for tuning in for another program. I have with me in studio today one of my friends. Her name is Christina Shourd. She is an attorney up in Michigan and has a story to share with us. If you remember her name or her voice here, it's because she's joined us for a couple other episodes before, but about completely different topics. So, Christina, first of all, thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
I will let you introduce your story.
Sure.
Because then you can take whatever approach to it you'd like, as opposed to me just being like, this is what it's about. I think you and I talked about, okay, who's this appropriate for audience-wise? And I think it's okay for the little ears. But parents, just kind of keep an ear out. And if you feel like, nah, my littles aren't ready for this kind of material yet, it does deal with pregnancy, that kind of thing. But I don't think anything that's going to be considered graphic or anything like that. So yeah, just keep an ear out. And if you have to tune us out, catch us on ichooselife.org underneath the radio tab. And this will post to your favorite podcasting sites as well. All right, Christina.
All right, I'll take you back about 9 to 10 years, somewhere in that range, to my first pregnancy. And it was somewhere around 2015, early 2015, January, February, I started to have pregnancy symptoms. And took a pregnancy test. It was positive, and right after taking that test, started spotting. So started being concerned, but nothing too alarming. It was my first pregnancy, so I really didn't know what to expect. Did some Googling, followed some rabbit trails there, but I ended up reaching out to my general practitioner, and she wasn't all that excited to see me. But a few days later, my symptoms ramped up, miscarriage symptoms, cramping and the spotting, and just kind of continued. And I had nausea, so I had this pregnancy symptoms all mixed into there. But when I met with her, she was so unenthusiastic to see me. Kind of the first words out of her mouth, well, is it must just be a chemical pregnancy. And that was a new term to me, but essentially a miscarriage that's so early that you don't even have the chance to realize that you're pregnant before you're miscarrying.
I don't love that term.
I hated it.
Because technically that would be me for baby Lily in our lives. We found out we were pregnant and immediately started miscarrying.
Yep.
Yeah, but that was still a baby. You're not okay.
Totally still a baby. So she used those terms and really
and
new to me.
This is your general practitioner, not an OBGYN.
Correct. Okay. And she was so unenthusiastic, but I'm like, I want more information. I am having these symptoms. This is my first baby. I went from being over the moon, best day of my life, to within minutes going, okay, well, I'm not so sure about this. So she unenthusiastically ordered one blood draw for me and an ultrasound. And at that point, because I was so new to pregnancy, I didn't realize if I just go see an OBGYN, they can do ultrasound in office. They have more expertise. They are the person to talk to.
I'm surprised she didn't refer you. Like, hey, lady, go see an OBGYN.
She eventually did, but that's kind of an interesting part of the story. But she basically told me that OBGYN does not want to see you until you're about 7 or 8 weeks pregnant. And so at this point, she ordered these tests and I went and got the blood drawn and I had HCG of about 91 or something, which is a really low number. You learn later in pregnancy, in healthy pregnancies, how those numbers are supposed to go up. They're supposed to double every 48 hours.
Yeah.
But she only ordered one draw. So
how would you ever know it was doubling?
Correct. And how would I, at this point in this stage of pregnancy, first baby, ever even know to say, well, please order the second draw. So I didn't. I just knew, okay, I'm pregnant. I have this hormone, or at least I was pregnant and I'm miscarrying. And with the ultrasound, it took me several days to even get in to see an ultrasound company. And the order she gave me literally said on it, probable miscarriage, spontaneous abort. And so every single place I called and saying, I want an ultrasound, they'd say to me, well, are you pregnant? And I would have to say, well, I think I am, but my doctor thinks I'm miscarrying, or I think I'm miscarrying. So this conversation over and over again, I finally get in to see an ultrasound tech. And this is, again, my first pregnancy, my first ultrasound for pregnancy. And it's not the tummy ultrasound that you're picturing.
No,
it's so sweet and just goo on your tummy, you're good to go. So it's pretty personal, pretty invasive. And when you have a progressed pregnancy and you're doing that 20-week scan, or you're even doing scans in your doctor's office, your OBGYN's office, they'll show you the screen and they'll say, oh, look, there's a little flashing heartbeat. And this is how fast the heart's going, and this is your baby's head, and this is your baby's bum, and all the fun things. Well, when it's not a healthy pregnancy, if there's not a healthy baby, or if it's just an ultrasound tech, they turn the screen away from you. They're probing around. They're looking for things. And they're not allowed to tell you anything.
Right.
Because it's not their job and it's beyond the scope of what they're allowed to do.
Right. They're not there to declare diagnoses. They're there to gather information, which then they give to the doctor.
Yeah. And the silence is deafening because you're sitting there going, I know I have a problem. Can you please just tell me what the problem is? So I did that ultrasound. It was $600 out of pocket, paid the fee, left, and my doctor concluded, yes, you're having this miscarriage. And the next day or two, I started having more severe symptoms, had to take a day off work.
Did you tell them what was going on, or did you just tell them, hey, I'm in a bad spot, I need a day off?
I told them what was going on. I had amazing bosses and I was part of a tight-knit team. And I also had, I think at that point, I had jury trials scheduled. I was a prosecutor at the time. So I had
Was this out in California?
This was in California,
Okay.
yep. So it was very high intensity work and it required synchronized handoff to people in my office. And so I felt like I needed to be as upfront as possible. And a lot of people will say, well, wait until you're a certain length along in your pregnancy to tell people because you don't know if the baby will stay put and you don't want all these people knowing your good news and then having to share the bad news with them. However, when you share the bad news with people or even your pregnancy news with people, they're more likely to check in on you, one, and two, they're really more likely to tell you, oh, I went through that too, or oh, I know someone who's going through this before.
Yeah.
Thankfully, from sharing my personal news, I did have people in my office come forward and say, oh, I had a miscarriage as well. I know what you're going through. And I felt this level of camaraderie.
Yeah.
And it totally bolstered my desire to go back to the office post what I thought was miscarriage because I knew I had this team of people. I knew I would have the support I needed. So had miscarriage symptoms that weren't as pronounced that lingered for, I would say it was about 2 weeks from start to finish from the time I had that pregnancy test and the spotting to the time where I was like, oh, okay, my miscarriage is over. I'm okay. And I went back to work and I thought I was ready to get back into things and take on the full workload. And then I started having pregnancy symptoms again. And I did the math and I did some Googling and I go, oh yeah, this is possible. There are women who can get pregnant a couple of weeks past the due date of a baby they've lost. I was sharing with people and they were affirming that, right, maybe that's possible, including my GP. So I called my GP and her first response to me, oh, this is great, but we need to figure out where your pregnancy is. And then we never really had a conversation again about what she meant by that statement because she ordered several blood draws to test for HCG levels. And I did the first one and my HCG was higher than it was when it was 91 weeks prior. And then I took the next one within 48 hours and it doubled. I believe I took the third one. I can't remember for sure, but I for sure took the first two and it was going up appropriately. And her reaction to me was, okay, well, when you get to 7 or 8 weeks, go talk to the OBGYN. Here's a referral. This is who I'd recommend. And then that was it. No more worry, no more, let's figure out where the pregnancy is. Oh, it's not really normal to get pregnant a couple weeks post-miscarriage. Then I carry on with my life. Well, 25-ish days. And I remember that because I remember celebrating my baby might have a heartbeat today. We've hit day 25. Therefore, baby has a heartbeat. And Chris is talking to my tummy. And the very next day, I started spotting again. So I reach out to the GP, tell her what's going on. And she's like, oh, that's normal. I'm not concerned.
Where were you emotionally at that point when you started spotting?
Oh, I was terrified because I thought I had a baby that I miscarried. I was pregnant again. I was terrified I was miscarrying again. I was still grieving the first baby. And then all the fears that kind of snowball from there. Like, if I'm going to miscarry 2 babies in a row, will I ever be able to get pregnant? Maybe I'm not going to get to have babies. Maybe this is why I've always been drawn to adoption stories. So my GP had referred me to this OBGYN's office. And I reached out to her before the time frame my doctor thought I should. And the doctor she referred me to was not available, but an entirely different OB in that office heard what was going on and cleared her schedule in the morning. She literally came in early so that she could get there, so she could see me because she was concerned. This whole, I was pregnant, I miscarried, now I'm pregnant again. She just, I think, knew deep down something more is going on to the story. So we got in to see her. It was 7:15. We checked in. We're surrounded by magazines about pregnancy. We're surrounded by pictures of success stories.
Yep. All the little babies.
Maybe we're having miscarriage too. And we go into the room and I explain the story. And she just looked at me like, no, honey, I don't think that's what's happening right now, but didn't say the words. And she did an ultrasound. And the first words out of her mouth was, do you know where the hospital is? I'm going to call them. I'm going to let them know you're on your way in and I will meet you there. I believe you have an ectopic pregnancy. I believe it's rupturing. And this is a life-threatening emergency. You need to go there immediately.
Was Chris with you?
He was with me. He did end up coming. Mm-hmm.
That makes a difference too.
Really good. Really, really, really good. It's good to have him there for that moment.
Yeah.
And not to be alone in that. So we drove to the hospital. I called my dad, who's a pastor, and he prayed with me on the phone and just really encouraged me and went into the ER. And my doctor, I think I've mentioned this before, but my doctor was an Indian woman. And alongside with the language of like, this is not a viable pregnancy, as opposed to this is not a baby that can survive, or this is a baby in the spot that is going to cause you to have life-threatening rupture and internal bleeding, that sort of thing, put me really on the defense. So I wasn't super trusting of her initially, which along the line, she became my OBGYN for my firstborn daughter and was just my most trusted person in the world. I wish I could have her for every pregnancy here on out, but she's on the other side of the country.
So when you started with her, this emergency situation that you're describing, because she's the woman who cleared her schedule for you because she was so concerned.
Get me in.
But she's using terminology that set your defenses up because you were aware enough, I think, right, of pro-life issues to know that when people are talking about like, oh, it's not a viable pregnancy, that can mean any number of things in today's society. Is that why that set you off?
Yeah, just the terminology. And I actually in law school took a class called bioethics. And in bioethics, I was surrounded by about 40 people who were all, let's say 95% of them were hyper liberal, hyper pro-choice. Many had volunteered at Planned Parenthood centers. And so I'd used that semester as an opportunity to write a paper on Roe versus Wade and all the case law that followed, and about how the unborn person was the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And I had them as this confined audience. They were captive. They had to listen to my presentation on my paper. They had to listen to my analysis.
Yeah. They could roll their eyes if they wanted to, but they had to sit there.
Yes. And honestly, if they had had tomatoes, I would have been covered in like pizza sauce. If they had stones, I would have been dead. They were so mad at me. But the first person to actually say something when it opened for Q&A was a woman who ironically raised her hand and she asked me, well, what about ectopic pregnancies? I had an ectopic pregnancy. If I hadn't had surgery, I would have died. And the only answer I could give her was, well, yeah, if that was a life-threatening instance, of course, that's to save the life of the mother. That's the only exception. If you can't save baby and mom,
then at least save mom.
And you can't save baby by allowing mom to die. Like I basically just positioned, the only one to be saved here is mom.
Right. It's a triage kind of a thing.
Yeah. Baby cannot be saved in this situation. But I did not know what an ectopic pregnancy was enough to specifically address that point. So it was so interesting to me that happened. And it really wasn't that much longer after that I'm dealing with my own very own ectopic pregnancy, being very defensive of anyone who might suggest that I should give up on this baby before I had the answers.
Do you think that learning that this was still the same baby made you even more defensive of the baby?
I don't know that I pieced all the puzzles fully together.
Okay. You were maybe in shock.
Yeah. It was one of those things. I don't remember at what point I realized, oh, it's the same baby. Probably when I got to the point of the ultrasound at the ER.
Okay.
So they did another ultrasound to confirm what my OB had found with clearer imaging and all of that. And at that point, they measured baby's size. And I remember being told that baby was probably somewhere between like 10 and 12 weeks old, but had stopped growing or started shrinking at some point. So somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks. I can't remember if it was where along the line of growth or development what the baby would have been. I don't know if knowing that it was not a miscarried baby. I was so defensive though. I think it was the language that set me off of pregnancy, the pregnancy tissue. We need to remove the pregnancy tissue. They just kept saying it. We need to remove the pregnancy tissue, the pregnancy. Like not that. We need to remove the baby and all the pregnancy tissue. Or no one started with baby does not have a heartbeat.
Yeah.
That's
They're
a different conversation than...
Right. They're skipping all of these initial foundational sorts of statements that would bring a mom to the table to understand what is going on in this moment.
Right. Especially a pro-life mom who's like, I will do anything to protect my baby. My brain was going to, I will stay on bed rest in this hospital for the next 30 weeks.
Yeah.
I don't care what it takes.
Yeah.
I don't care what other health challenge I have because of this. I will live in this hospital and endure whatever I need to protect this baby.
Yeah.
Not knowing there are no options. They don't have transplantation options available. There's no choice for that. And there are cases when you Google, there are cases of people having had an ectopically placed baby reach a really far stage in development. But normally that's an ectopic pregnancy where the baby's implanted in the abdominal cavity where there's room to grow. Whereas my baby was in my left fallopian tube, and the fallopian tube is, I don't know, call it like one of those balloons that a clown will blow up at the fair and turn into a dog. Like it's just a skinny little tube.
Yeah, it's like a straw.
Yeah, it can stretch, but only to a certain point. If it gets too full, there's no more room. It's going to burst. It has capacity. So that was the point my fallopian tube had reached. And the baby's in a sac inside the fallopian tube at that point, and the sac also can burst. So I'm not sure which part was rupturing, but when I went in for the ultrasound, the second one in the ER, and I came out again, I'm in that ER ultrasound. They're not showing me the scream. They're not talking me through. I don't know to ask the questions like, does baby have a heartbeat? Do you see the baby? And that sort of thing. And so by the time my OB arrived at the hospital, having truly cleared her full schedule, not just made her morning available. When she arrived, I was on the defensive. I need more information. I need to protect this baby. And so she walked me over. I just
picture you as like a cat backed into the corner with claws, and these doctors like, I'm going to help you. And you're like, the heck you are.
Absolutely. Not to mention, the last time I was talking to you on the show was about powers of attorney for healthcare, so advanced healthcare directives, and they were shoving their statutory forms in my face. So in case I, went into surgery and came out in a less communicative state with lesser cognitive abilities, they were asking me to tell them to pull the plug. So I'm dealing with two life issues while highly emotional, highly hormonal. And this is the thing. I would say I was in pain, but I wasn't. And traditionally, people who have ectopic pregnancies, they have severe pain, severe bleeding, things of that nature that really cue them to the fact that there's something drastically wrong. And while I had spotting, it wasn't to a high degree. And while I maybe had some discomfort, it wasn't a pain, which if you're pregnant, you expect to feel discomfort, right? You expect to feel some cramps here and there. You expect to feel whatever, especially your first pregnancy, you don't know what's normal or not normal or within the range of normal.
Right. Or how your body handles pregnancy.
Right. So yes, I was highly on the defensive, but she ended up walking me over to this nurse's station. She's like, I'm not supposed to bring you here, but you clearly need to see what I can see. And so she showed me the screen of all the ultrasound images and showed me how my fallopian tube where the sac baby was in was ruptured and full of blood and how baby didn't have a heartbeat. And she explained it to me.
Yeah.
So I could say, well, I'm not fighting for my baby's life anymore.
Right.
So I can let that go today. But the reality is that if you start internally bleeding and it's not stopped, then that could be the reason you don't continue living. That could be the reason you die. So it was life or death. I didn't have a choice. I feel like it was a gift from God because there are a lot of women who go in with an ectopic pregnancy and baby maybe still has a heartbeat, baby is still living, and they still are facing a life or death, life-threatening situation where they don't have a different medical alternative than to have the baby removed from their body to save their life. And so I feel like God knew I needed that peace of mind of I'm not dealing with this issue. So then it just became my option is surgery. So then went under for surgery. It took a couple hours. And when I woke up, the best way I could describe is I felt like I had been shot in the abdomen. It was a laparoscopic surgery. So they went in through my belly button and then 2 punctures in each side. And they took out my fallopian tube with baby. And that was it. So then I was on bed rest for a week and was supposed to be on like heavy restrictions for a week after that. But because I had such a loving and supportive workplace and because my mind needed to do something besides grieve.
Yeah.
I needed
some return to normalcy.
And like even advocacy for someone else.
Yeah.
Like, I'm good at advocating for other people. For myself, it's not as much of a strength. I love advocating for other people, but no. For myself, I just needed to move on and refocus into something that I felt I could do without feeling so emotional. So I grieved. I was not despairing. I never hit a point of despair, but just this is a heavy, heavy, heavy grief.
Well, and you were having to also sort out all these things that you thought were true and all this grief that you had already started into the work of, because it's work to grieve.
Yeah.
And then all of that gets partially wiped and reconfigured. And then you're like, okay, what are we? And so just the amount of time it would take to rearrange those things in your head and come to grips with the new reality of what actually happened would be crazy. Because then, as silly as it sounds, and maybe this occurred to you, maybe it didn't, I'd be interested to know. Because I've heard stories of women who miscarried and then found out that they actually didn't have a baby. So it wasn't actually a miscarriage. So they go from grieving the loss of a child to grieving the loss of a child who they never had, which in itself is a loss.
Yeah.
And so
a loss of a
this
dream.
Really complex, complicated thing going on here.
Yeah, no, it was a lot to wade through. What made it the most difficult was this initial reaction of, because my GP was not paying attention, I almost died.
Yeah.
My husband almost lost a wife. My husband in the ER was waiting for his wife to come out of surgery with, one, I'm losing a baby, but also I may lose my wife. And so like the fear of that. But this GP of mine was so incompetent at identifying ectopic pregnancy for me and referring me to the doctor and taking seriously, the thought. She clearly had the thought that I might be having an ectopic pregnancy.
Right, because she said where.
Yeah.
And ectopic is all about location. Ecto means outside.
Yes, we need to figure out where your pregnancy is. And so I did explore for a while the idea of filing a lawsuit against her. So it was like wading through that anger of like, if it wasn't for her, it wouldn't have reached this point. And interestingly, over time, one, we decided not to sue. And two, it dawned on me because I had a friend who almost simultaneously with me had an ectopic pregnancy who had the alternative route of treatment where it was caught soon enough that they could prescribe her methotrexate, I think is how you pronounce it, which is like a chemotherapy drug that you take and it shrinks down your baby and all of the things that are created to sustain your baby to the point where it is absorbed into your body, is what I understand.
Yeah.
And I realized it was another, like, by the grace of God, I would have been tormented by having to make that choice, or not make that choice, but be faced with that this is your only medical option, unless you want it to reach the point of rupture, and then surgery is your option. And so to not have to endure that type of treatment for an ectopic pregnancy, I think was a blessing in disguise. And so that brought me to a huge place of peace.
And I love, Christina, that you're willing to come and share that story with us. Because it is. I mean, you mentioned that was the first question that your fellow students hit you with in that bioethics class in law school. And it is still, maybe more so since Dobbs was handed down, it is the first thing that people go to try to say, oh, see, you can't restrict abortion. You're going to kill all these women who have ectopic pregnancies. And ectopic pregnancies happen fairly often. It's like 1 to 2 in every 100 pregnancies in the U.S. So you got 100 women lined up in a room. Chances are 1 to 2 of them have an ectopic pregnancy. That's a lot.
Yeah.
It feels like a lot to me.
I remember.
So this is an issue we deal with a lot.
Yeah. I remember when all of that was escalating in the news and on social media, seeing all these posts about, my cousin even posted something about it. By taking away abortion, you're sentencing women with ectopic pregnancies and molar pregnancies and miscarriages and all of these things to death. And I'm going through the list. I'm going, well, ectopic pregnancy is handled in an ordinary medical setting.
Right.
Not at a Planned Parenthood, not an abortion clinic. That is an ER surgical center that does other surgeries with highly skilled staff and highly skilled surgeons and equipment. And it's an entirely different medical setting than an abortion. And then molar pregnancy, same thing. There's an entirely different approach. Or the woman who's having a placental abruption, that's another. Abortion is not the treatment for those problems. An ectopic pregnancy treatment, a salpingectomy is what I had, That's not an abortion. It's not even on the list of things that a Planned Parenthood would do for you. Another thought that occurred to me in this process was with people having abortions, they're not finding out, one, where's their baby placed? I do wonder what statistic of women go in for an abortion, but the baby's not in their womb, especially when they're not doing ultrasound guided.
Right.
And secondly, I think it's an antibody that some babies produce. So it's an Rh negative or Rh positive. And if your baby is, I think, Rh negative, but you're Rh positive, I could be saying it in reverse, but if they're one and you're the other, it can create this reaction in your body where your body will now fight for your next baby to be implanted. It will fight against.
Yeah, it goes on defense so that your next baby can't implant.
Yes. And that's insane to me that's a factor that if you don't know if that baby is Rh negative or positive, you don't know if now your next baby may have a lesser chance of success.
Right.
Because you don't have that information. So I found that interesting and heartbreaking, really. It's one of those pieces of the equation that no one knows. And as a person going through pregnancy for the first time, you don't know what's normal for ultrasound.
Right.
Your OBGYN can do it in office. And your HCG should double every 48 hours. And it's okay to go see an OBGYN early in pregnancy and to ask for treatments that might not be standard. They might say no, but there's no harm in asking.
But this is why I tell people all the time, it doesn't matter what age you are, please make sure that your OBGYN is pro-life. Because those are the OBGYNs, and there's OBGYNs who aren't pro-life who take miscarriage seriously, but they're not going to take miscarriage seriously in the same way that a pro-life OBGYN was. They're not going to take ectopic pregnancies in the same way that a pro-life OBGYN does. It just changes everything. So do the work, find out, is your OBGYN pro-life? And just because your daughter's 13 and is years away from baby bearing, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't start her with a pro-life OBGYN now, because you need to build that relationship and it all matters. Like you said, it could have been life or death. And the care that that person gives you makes such a difference. And the options that they're willing to pursue, the solutions that they're willing to try, the research and reading that they are willing to look into, it all depends on their original worldview and what they are and are not willing to accept.
Thanks. So that baby has a name.
Oh, good. What is that baby's name?
We don't know if baby is a boy or a girl. We named him or her Joe, which is short for JoJo, because in the Dr. Seuss book, JoJo is a tiny little who person, and a person is a person no matter how small.
Thanks, Christina. I appreciate you telling our story.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to I Choose Life News and Views. If you have questions about this program, or if you'd like to support the fight for life, please call 260-471-1849 or go to ichooselife.org, because without the right to life, no other rights matter.